Dead faces in the water. Dead faces everywhere. A fanfiction of The Lord of the Rings, written by Tathrin, with music composed by Alex Mason, and narrated by Lord Grimwing. Summary. The dead are walking across Middle-earth. With the Palantir network down, there is no way to warn the world of the danger that is lurching out of its shadows, save by carrying the news out by hand. Imladris Hospital has failed to find a cure. Mirkwood is burning and Gondor rots from within. A desperate company of elves, men, and dwarves strike out across the shadowed land to seek answers from the lore masters of Lothlorien. But the journey there will prove darker and more perilous than any could have foreseen. Will they live long enough to save their homelands? Or will they die and rise again? Or a zombie apocalypse story set in a modernized high fantasy version of Middle-earth, starring some familiar faces in a very different war against the dark and the dead. This story is rated teen audience and up. There is an archive warning for major character death. The major characters in this story are Legolas Greenleaf, Gimli, son of Glóin, Boromir, son of Denethor II, Arwen Undumriel, Aragorn, Glorfindel, Elrond Perithel, and original characters. Additional tags for this story include Alternate Universe, Alternate Universe Zombie Apocalypse, Alternate Universe Modern Setting, Zombie Apocalypse Typical Violence, Modernized high fantasy setting. We still have elves and dwarves and hobbits, we just have semi-magical cars and internet too. Fantasy biology. Asexual Boromir. Foster father Maglor. Established Arwen/Aragorn. Slow burn. For Legolas and Gimli. Author's note. This story, particularly in its opening chapters, will spread across all of Middle-earth to show the overall effects of the Rising. I have not tagged all of the characters who will appear in these sections, because far too many of them will be seen only once, for reasons I'm sure you can guess at. Narrator's note. I beg the audience's forgiveness if I butcher the pronunciation of some of these words. I'm new to the fandom, and trying my best. Now, on with the show. Dead faces in the water. Dead faces everywhere. Chapter 1. The Rising. A prologue. Summary. The Rising begins. It started, at least in Mirkwood, when the king came home. He was dead, of course, and had been dead for 3,000 years at that point. The world had changed so much in the years since his death that he would have barely recognized it, had he been conscious enough to see the lands he walked through. But he wasn't. He was dead. He was dead, and the dead followed after. Orifur and Gilthawin and Hosalas and Tethion and Ingwalig and Hebenestor and all the others who had died with their king in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. It started when the dead came home. Their bodies should have rotted away to nothing long ago, nothing but the ghosts of dead faces staring up unseeing forever out of the fetid waters. They should have. But the Dark Lord who had ruled that dark land, who had clawed his way out of his own grave more than once, had left a mark on Mordor too deep to be erased even by his own destruction. He had been a craftsman, after all, that Maia once called Sauron and once called Mairon and even, once, named Anatar, by those unfortunate enough to love and trust him to their own destruction. He had been a craftsman that lost Maia, and his favorite media was souls. Perhaps someone should have worried more about those bodies in the dead marshes outside the land of Mordor. Perhaps someone should have worried sooner about the way their faces did not fade from the foul waters, even when their flesh was centuries gone. Perhaps someone should have remembered that necromancer had been one of the names by which Sauron had been known, too. Perhaps someone should have remembered why. The bodies in the dead marshes had drained to dust and rot centuries ago, leaving nothing but dead echoes rippling in the water. But that water lay outside a necromancer's lair, in lands that had been long poisoned by his loathsome arts. Dead and gone they were, those men and dwarves and elves and orcs who had died fighting there so long ago. Dead and gone and rotting. But even dead, the echoes of their souls endured. Trapped, corrupted, their spirits rotting from within, they endured. And eventually, they rose. The risen dead were no army to be commanded by the wraiths who held dominion over the ruin of Mordor now. Their unliving corpses were driven only by hunger for life, for flesh. They could not be commanded, or controlled, or contained. There were no spirits left within their dead husks to be commanded. The dead scattered when they rose, following the smells and sounds and flickering lights of the living wherever their shambling feet could wander, following nothing but their own individual hunger, even as they moved and moaned as a mindless mob. Some fell on the white walls of Minas Tirith, or wandered on into the lands of the Horse Lords, or further yet to the high peaks of the misty mountains and the lands beyond. Some wandered back into the barren lands of Mordor, where they found little life to sustain them. Some wandered further and found warm flesh to bite, to feed upon, and see their sickness spread. Some died a second death, broken at the bottom of cliffs, or shattered beneath a mumok's hoof, or trapped in fetid pools until their dead flesh rotted and their bones washed out to the sea. But Orifur came back to his beloved Mirkwood. Some said it was Dul Guldur, looming like a lodestone in those tall black trees, drawing the dead. Others said it was because even in death, the forest still called her old king home. Whatever the reason, he came, and death followed with him. Orifur came home, and the rising began. Up next, an elf leaves home. Dead faces in the water. Dead faces everywhere. Chapter 2. Mirkwood. Summary. An elf leaves home. Legolas did not want to go. Mirkwood was his home, the only home he has ever known, the only home he has ever wanted. He knows that wanderlust is common for elves of his age, has waved many a friend farewell from the borders of the forest, smiling to see them heading off into their adventures, and always eager to hear the stories of their travels when they came back. Has even, in the rare cases where they don't come back, poured hundreds and hundreds of words into letters and text and p-mails going back and forth between the forest and whatever new home they've chosen to take up for a month, a year, a decade, a century. Has loved scrolling through their photos, their stories, all the evidence of their lives elsewhere. But he has never wanted to go there himself. His home is here. His trees are here. His family is here. But people need to know. And the phones aren't working, haven't been working well for weeks now, have been getting steadily worse every day until now there's nothing but dial tones and automated delivery failure messages. The Palantir network has been slowly breaking down, running slower and slower, glitching out and stalling, and connection unstable. Please reboot. And connection problems. Try again? Over and over and over, until finally the wood elves have had to admit that whatever has gone wrong with their connection to the outside world, it isn't something that they're going to be able to fix from inside the forest. There are things in the forest now. Dark things, dreadful things, not the usual things, the spiders and bone deer and flying snakes and giant millipedes and wormlings. The elves of Mirkwood know how to deal with the creatures that live with them among their trees. But these things, these new and terrible things, they do not seem to live at all. And they are too dangerous to be kept within the borders of the forest. They will get out. Their darkness will spread. They have to tell people, to warn people before it's too late. But with the P-network out and the phones down, there is really only one way left to do that. And, well, maybe it's for the best. Some things can't really be believed when the message comes through online, can they? It's too easy to doubt when you only hear about something through a screen. Some things you have to see for yourself. And when you can't see them, when you can't afford to wait long enough for them to get close enough to be seen, then you need to hear about them face to face, where it's so much harder to disbelieve the impossible. Some things you have to say in person. They're too big, too terrible for anything else. And someone has to carry the message, to carry the warning. So Legolas turns his back on his forest and takes a deep breath, and he walks away. Behind him, the smoke rises. Up next, problems under the mountain. Dead faces in the water. Dead faces everywhere. Chapter 3. Erebor. Summary. Problems under the mountain. It's a strange sickness that has gripped their underground city. Every day it seems that someone else succumbs to the fever, blood spilling from their nose in a flood or in a trickle. Every day the moans that rise from the sick rooms get louder, bleaker. It seems as though the dwarves who have fallen ill are being hollowed from the inside out, slowly becoming less and less themselves. The farthest gone have to be chained with strong iron to their beds now, their eyes wild and sightless, and their mouths increasingly biting whenever a living body passes near enough to stir them from their stupor. They are hungry, the sick, but they cannot be fed, can barely be approached close enough to have their IVs changed, lest they sink their ravenous teeth into the flesh of their fellows. The blood that drips endlessly from their noses coats their chins and makes the sight grotesque beyond reason. All those bloody teeth snapping over red, red beards. It's enough to make one believe in ghosts and gods again. This illness is hardly the first plague to fall upon the lonely mountain, but there is something about it that feels different somehow. Worse. Perhaps it is nothing more than the eerie way the moans of the sick echo off the stone walls of their underground city, but it feels different.
Of all the times for the bloody Palantir network to go down,
Dawn grumbles.
It's inconvenient, to be sure,
Glóin agrees.
But I don't think we can wait for whatever glitch this is to be worked out. It's been days now with no word and no help.
He shakes his head, the gray-streaked copper of his beard tossing unhappily with the sharp movement.
Nobody's getting better, Dawn.
I know, Dawn says with a tired sigh.
And we don't dare go to Dell for help. Hard as this sickness is on dwarves, we can't risk exposing the humans there to it, providing they haven't been infected already.
Glóin shakes his head with an unhappy sigh at the mental image of all those bloody, beardless faces.
Wouldn't do us much good anyway,
Adori grumbles.
Not like there's much in the way of healing lore in Dell, and their peanut bounces off ours.
Glóin tugs his beard in agreement.
There's only one place we can turn that might have the answers we need now.
I know, Dawn says again.
I know. Doesn't mean I have to like it.
Dory's nod is grim.
Skirt the forest to the north and take the high pass,
he says, his voice muffled somewhat by the blood-splattered handkerchief he holds to his face.
You'll be in Rivendell in a week, even if you stop to sightsee.
Glóin snorts.
Planning on doing a lot of that along the way, yeah,
he drawls.
Probably get there just in time for the P network to start working again and make the whole trip a waste of time,
Dawn mutters. He tugs unhappily on a heavy white braid. Glóin eyes the old dwarf with affection and hides a smirk in his beard.
Probably,
he agrees in a mild voice.
But if we take some samples with us, it will help their researchers more than just a description of the disease would anyway, I reckon. You're still assuming this is something new, then?
Says Dawn. His voice is flat, heavy, the voice of granite grinding out through living flesh.
Something they don't already have a cure cooked up for?
His thick white brows draw closer in a scowl.
Something they'll have to figure out afresh, and not just pull out of some cabinet ready-made.
Glóin nods.
I am,
he says. His own voice is calm, steady as dwarven masonry, but his hands shake.
I know there's no proof of that, and with the P-net down, we can't get a relay to any of the lore havens and check the symptoms for a match, but... well,
he grimaces.
It feels wrong.
You don't have to tell me that,
Dory mumbles into his handkerchief, and Glon and Dawn both grimace.
Fine,
Dawn says.
Collect the samples and as much documentation as the doctors can put together for you in a hurry. Hopefully, this will turn out to be a fool's errand, but...
His voice trails away into another grimace, and his old eyes wander into the shadows at the far end of the wide stone room. Dawn doesn't want to admit it out loud, but he shares Glon's foreboding that there's something worse underneath all of this.
But better a wasted errand than one too delayed to be of any help.
Glon finishes for him when it eventually becomes clear that he will not, and Dawn nods tersely.
Nobody's died yet,
he says, an attempt to cheer their spirits.
Hurry up, and maybe nobody will,
mutters Dory. Dawn and Glon both nod, but cannot quite bring themselves to meet his eyes.
From your lips to Mahal's ears,
Dawn says, and the other two murmur in agreement. Dory's nose continues to bleed. Up next, navigation issues. Dead faces in the water. Dead faces everywhere. Chapter 4. Gondor. Summary. Navigation issues. The chime of the navter shutting off makes Boromir swear. He reaches across the empty passenger seat, fumbling for the paper map that he knows is folded away somewhere in the jumble of things stuffed in the side door pocket. The car veers along with his lean, and he swears again and jerks the wheel back into place before he can drive completely off the road and into the sparse woods of Andorian. He rolls to a stop on the empty road and glares at the treacherous navter. The devices are not entirely reliable, Boromir knows, due to the occasional hiccups and dead spaces between the Palantir network relays. That is why he checked twice to make sure he had a paper map of the route to his destination before he left the city, but he wasn't expecting to have to use it yet. He is barely more than a day's drive from Minas Tirith. The P-network should be plenty strong enough here to maintain a steady electro-themagic connection, but the blinking red light on the little orb that sits atop his dashboard is very clear. The device is receiving power, but no signal. Boromir swears and punches the button to restart the navter. Again. This close to his home, he does not have great need of it yet. The roads between Gondor and Rohan are relatively straightforward, and Boromir has driven them before. He could probably make it all the way to Edoras without any navigational assistance and only a few minor unintended detours if he tried. He hasn't been there often, or recently, but he has visited before. He knows the way. But he is not going to Rohan now. He is going to Rivendell, a place where he has never been and which lies far on the other side of the Misty Mountains, which he has never crossed before. He is going to need a map, and if Gondor's famed Palantir network will not provide him with an automated one, he will simply have to do his navigation by hand and eye and luck. So be it. He is a soldier of Gondor, not some sheltered civilian who doesn't even know how to hold a compass. He will prevail. That does not mean it will not be annoying to have to rely entirely on a paper map, especially when he is trying to watch the road and the will at the same time. Boromir swears again, shifts into park, and shoves his door open. He walks around the front of the car and opens the passenger side door from the outside, then leans down to rummage through the pamphlets, maintenance manuals, napkins, notes, and maps of Gondor, Harad, Umbar, and the brown lands that fill the narrow door pocket. He is more irritated than this minor annoyance merits, he knows. It is because he is already irritated enough by the need for this journey that even a minor annoyance claws under his skin like a plunge through stinging nettle. He should not have to be here. No one should have to be here. Boromir argued long against sending anyone on this journey.
Why should we go to such effort to send word of this mystery to Imladris?
He had scoffed.
They have shown little enough interest in our needs, those proud scholars in their sheltered valley. Why should we crawl to them for answers when they could never be bothered to send more concrete aid before?
But he was outvoted. And so, when it was decided that someone would have to carry the news of the vanished dead that the Palantir network could not relay, Boromir volunteered to be the one to make the journey. He was a captain of Gondor's army, after all. He served his kingless kingdom out of love and duty both. If this was some foul trick of Mordor, better that someone with experience defending himself in battle be the messenger to risk their wrath. Better he than his brother. Boromir is committed to the journey now, for he has never shirked a task that he has taken up, and he will not start now. That does not mean that he is pleased to be out here, driving away from the White City when his people might need him. That does not mean he is pleased to be seeking outside help when the rest of Middle-earth has so often left Gondor to stand alone. Over the sound of the engine and the wind and his own swearing, he cannot hear the distant sound of moans coming up the road behind him. Boromir does not know that the noise of his passage drew the attention of dead ears, does not know that dead feet now shuffle slowly but unflaggingly in his vehicle's wake. He does not know that when he stops to sleep, they continue to walk, closing the distance that he puts between them afresh each day. Perhaps he does not need to know. He is not in any great danger from these stumbling corpses, not at the speed at which he travels. They will not catch up. Not unless he drives into some strange and terrible delay. They will not catch up, but they will follow him as long as they can maintain a line of sight, or smell, or sound to guide them onward towards the living flesh they crave. They will follow him until some other, more tempting prey diverts them from their path. Boromir does not know that as he drives from the White City, he draws death on behind him. He flips through the maps he has found, searching for one that shows the lands to the west of Gondor rather than the more familiar ones to the south and east. Finally, with a triumphant cry, he pulls out the map he needs and hurries back to the will. He unfolds the wide sheet of paper out across the seat beside him and begins his journey once again. Behind him, the dead walk on. Up next, dead kings look out over a dead land. Dead faces in the water, dead faces everywhere. Chapter 5, Mordor. Summary. Dead kings look over a dead land. The Witch King of Angmar had a name once. He cannot remember it now, lost as it was so long ago to the shadow, lost along with so much else. But he had a name, and a people, and a home that was not this bleak and barren place, this land of pitted pools full of fetid water and fallow ground fertilized with the ruined carcasses of generations of lost wars. He may have had a family, too. He no longer knows. Into his solitude, Khamûl, clever Khamûl, scheming Khamûl, Khamûl who somehow kept his name, who somehow kept a holy fragment of his sense of self even beneath the smothering weight of the shadow, glides up on the memory of legs to stand beside him, and the Witch King feels his intangible fingers tighten irritably on the heavy railing. The stone scrapes and cracks beneath his grip, but the Witch King knows that it is not because his fingers press against the black rock. He does not have fingers anymore, only the illusion of them cloaked in heavy metal armor. It is an illusion strong enough to break the world, but it is still only an illusion, and there is no comfort in that empty strength. "What?" he asks Khamûl, his voice that is not a voice, harsh with irritation. "The marshes are empty," Khamûl replies. He sounds unbothered, but then he always does. The Witch King cannot remember when there was enough substance in Khamûl's heart for his dread lieutenant to be bothered by anything. That ceased long before Sauron fell. "What do I care for the dead of the marshes?" the Witch King sneers. "No more than I do, I'm sure," Khamûl retorts. "But it is pleasant to think of them where they are now, is it not?" he asks. Behind the emptiness that rests between his collar and his crown, there is a hollow echo of laughter. The Witch King turns his own empty face towards the pale, distant speck of the White City. Mortal eyes would not be able to see it, so small and petty, from the heights of the Dark Tower. But the Witch King is no mere mortal that he is in possession of eyes. He looks at the shining jewel of Gondor's capital, and with the face he no longer has, he smiles.
Yes,
He agrees with Khamul.
yes, it is pleasant.
The two wraiths who were once kings, once men, once things with names and hopes and cares and hearts, look out together across the black land in the wake of the absent dead, and the ghosts of their silent voices rise in hollow laughter. From distant Minas Tirith comes the first whispers of hungry moans. Up next, horses always come home.